civilization prior to this one not too long ago, and this current civilization simply moved in and took over the real estate. And when I say real estate, what I mean is not just the real estate, but also many of the buildings. And as I've said before, folks, really when you look at our cities, there's no way these cities were built by us. Some of the architecture is just too old. Some of the architecture is just too complicated by our standards. How do we ever do any of this stuff? I mean, we certainly can't do it today. And some of the architecture here in Australia, it's not possible for the settlers to have built this. They simply wouldn't have had the machinery to be able to quarry the stones to build these huge government buildings, which are very old buildings. We've got buildings here that have been here since the late 1700s, and yet this country is supposed to have been colonised in 1770. And yet by 1778 we've got cities. By the early 1800s we've got huge cities, and it's just not possible for these cities to have been built in that time. And evidence would suggest that they weren't built in that time. They were already here. We just simply cleaned them up and moved in and took over the real estate. And of course, when you consider that, then you've got to ask the question, well, what happened to all the people that were in the cities before we came and did the cleanup? You know, what happened to everything, folks? What happened to all the technology? You know, some of the technology that exists in these old buildings, and a lot of them, as I've said before, some of the buildings like churches and some of these very, very complex structures you see around the place, they don't really look like buildings. They look like they're machines. They look like they're energy gathering machines. And I think all buildings were designed to actually gather energy. I think free energy was a reality. I think free energy was part of everyday life. And I think that a lot of these structures were designed with that in mind. And they were designed to harvest energy from the surrounding field. I know it sounds a little outrageous, but there's every indication this is what was going on. Have you looked at some of the old fireplaces in some of the very old buildings? They don't seem very conducive to burning actual fires in there. Some of them are extremely shallow and don't appear to have chimneys attached to them, and there's no grating, no sort of place to actually build the fire. Very strange looking fireplaces. They seem to be connected to a metal type of device, some sort of a metal railing that runs around them, and there's always these two items, like two urns or two little spires that sit at the front of the fireplace, and there's always a metal plate at the back. And perhaps these two metal objects at the front combined in perhaps some sort of positive negative energy field and projected some sort of a beam onto the metal plate at the back, or some sort of energy onto the plate, and the plate itself was what heated up and heated the room. I've been getting a lot of people sending me information out of Russia, which has been really good, so keep that up. And there's also a Russian website that has noticed this and is suggesting that this is a possibility as well. And a lot of these old fireplaces, they've got these setups, folks, and they really don't look very conducive to burning wood. And again, you look at the copper tops of a lot of these buildings and these devices that are all constructed on top of them, you've really got to wonder why they're there. Are they just there for decoration, or is there a higher function to some of these things? There's a building in Florida called the Ponce de Leon Hotel, which has got a very interesting device on top of it. And it looks like it's just some decorative thing, but when you look at the building, this device, it's very unusually shaped and it's made of metal. And it's quite an intricate little device as well, and it's not exactly in a position where people are going to be viewing it. So what's it doing there? And why go to all the trouble to make something so incredibly decorative and to put it up in the center of the roof? And this is quite a big hotel. This is a 540-room hotel. What's it doing with this metal device on the roof? And if it's just there for decorative purposes, why do they make it out of metal? You know, it's very obviously different to the rest of the building. The question is, what's it doing there? Is it just a decoration, or is it actually performing some sort of function? And I would very much suggest that it is performing some sort of function, and that free energy was a reality back in the middle of the last century and is very much still a reality today. It's just that the technology has been hidden from us. And really looking at all this, folks, looking at these foundlings and this whole information about the mud flood that's come out, all the information that's been surfacing lately, it really causes me to question everything. question everything that I thought I knew about history. And I've spent a lot of time in my life looking into history. It's always been a fascination for me because of all these artifacts lying all over the world, all this weird stuff lying everywhere. You kind of find out about it when you're young and you want to know where it all comes from and what really happened. But all you've got to go on, all I had to go on for many years was books from academia, books from libraries. You could go to places and see things, but then you try to research them. All you've really got to go on is local legends and what the books tell you. But there's so much more information surfacing now, and the whole idea of these foundlings, these massive amounts of children being shipped all around the world and being used to run cleanup operations after the mud flood. You've really got to question this, folks. You've really got to look at what happened and where our civilizations came from. And like I said, it causes me to question everything. All of the wars, all of the formation of society as we know it that we've been given anyway. The Napoleonic Wars, World War I, World War II, all of these things, I question all of them now. I don't think any of them have been fought under the pretexts that we've been told. I think all of them are actually all related and are all part of the destruction of this ancient culture, this ancient civilization. And I think it's still ongoing. I think that the war in Syria, the destruction of Aleppo, the war in Yemen, this is all about destroying the infrastructure, destroying the buildings, destroying every trace of the past, any trace of anything that would suggest the existence of Tartaria, of Atlantis, of this lost culture, this lost civilization. It helps me understand the feeling I had when I was a child, why I was so appalled and so disoriented by the fact that people had to pay to be alive and we had to buy land. Why I felt quite literally that some terrible mistake had been made and I'd been born into the wrong reality. It makes me question where my mother really came from. My mother and her 4 sisters, 5 daughters that were just suddenly in Tasmania living out on this property. How did they get there? Were they really born there? My mother remembers her mother was very young and died very early, and she had quite a strict father who married another young woman. But I really begin to question all of it. I really begin to question what my roots are, what my family ties are, what my family tree really is. Because really when you begin to look at the bigger picture of all this, folks, you begin to see that the war for Tartaria was the major battle of this earth, and it's still ongoing. It would appear that Hitler attempted to make a last stand for Tartaria. This is why he was using the swastika. And the swastika is a very ancient symbol, folks. A great video that was actually put out by New Earth the other day, where she went through the use of the swastika in Western cultures. You find that the swastika was very much used in America, was used in Australia, was used everywhere. It's a very powerful, very potent symbol and a very positive symbol. And suddenly it was turned around and presented to the world as being this hateful symbol of fascism. And what are we giving our attention to now? Things like peace signs. And what's the peace sign? The peace sign is the Druidic death rune. And here's us worrying about all these wars, giving all our attention to this peace sign and wondering why so many people are dying when we're sitting here worshipping the death rune. This sort of stuff is what's been done to us, folks. The swastika is actually a very positive symbol from the past, representing abundance and giving and all sorts of good things. You've got to wonder why it's been vilified. Well, I guess not. You can understand why it's been vilified so dramatically and so effectively, why everybody now sees it as a symbol of fascism and a symbol of hate when really it's a symbol of freedom. And no, I don't think Hitler was a great guy, and I don't think that we should all become Nazis. This isn't what it's all about, folks, but I don't even believe the stories of the Nazis, and I certainly don't believe the stories of the Holocaust at all, because there's no evidence to support it, and I don't care what anybody thinks about me saying that. The thing is, ladies and gentlemen, as I said, I now question absolutely everything that I thought I knew about history, about how we got here, and about where we're going, and about how things are really being run. Even with the mud flood, folks, I would suggest the mud flood was done via frequency, done via creating a type of an earthquake scenario. When you have an earthquake, when you're in an earthquake, what happens is the shaking causes the soil beneath you to liquefy. And that's what causes the buildings to drop. I mean, they start shaking because their foundations are unstable because the ground below them has turned to liquid. This is what I felt when I was in Mexico last year. There was quite a big earthquake in Acapulco when I was there, about 7.2 or something. And I was on the ground floor of the Princess Palace Resort, and the entire ground of the hotel felt like we were floating, felt like we were sailing on the ocean, because the whole hotel was floating on the liquid soil beneath it. And that's what happens. And if you could liquefy soil in a certain way so that the ground either flowed down from the mountains over the villages, or the villages simply sank into the ground, this would be how you could destroy a lot of the population quite quickly. Perhaps you could do it by setting up something like a 5G system, by setting up a whole electromagnetic grid, getting everybody dependent on all this technology and making them carry the technology with them everywhere, and then you could just fry them all whenever you want to, flood the whole place by changing the frequency, flood the whole place with mud, and let the domestic pets do the rest. The dogs would clean up all the mess on the streets. Could be why we're all encouraged to have dogs as pets in cities, folks. I mean, once they run out of food and start running in packs, the dogs would have a field day. You wouldn't even have hardly even any bones lying around the cities left. The dogs would take care of all of that. So that could be a good reason, folks. But looking at all this, I think they are preparing to do it again pretty soon. I really do. I think we are heading for a new reset, or whatever you want to call it. But I think they are probably deciding that this population is waking up a little bit too much and that it's time to pull the plug on them. And I think that is very much on the cards, folks. I would suggest that is why they are rolling this whole 5G system out. And also things like, as I mentioned a few times before, someone I was speaking to, an engineer that I was speaking to a couple of years ago, who builds bridges and buildings, and he's always built bridges with a 100-year lifespan, but now he's been instructed that the new bridges they're building only need to be constructed with a 15-year lifespan. And that was 2 years ago. So I think we're heading for another reset, folks. I think they're going to do it again. I think they've done it several times before. And as I said, I think history is very different. When I look at this and I really take in the fact that this architecture exists all around the world, really look at the mud flood, and really let the concept of these tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of foundlings being shipped all around the world really sink in. I begin to question everything. Like I said, I begin to question the slave trade, what really happened with the slave trade, how these people were moved around. I question how the white people got everywhere. Were the white people the emissaries of Tartaria? Because it wasn't just black people who were being enslaved. It was everybody who was being enslaved. And not only that, it was mainly children who were being enslaved and sent out as workers all around the world. So who set this whole thing up? Who set it up to have all these races hating each other and fighting against each other and arguing about their past and things that happened in the past, none of which they can be actually sure of occurring at all? Because all we've got is this false history we've been fed. Nothing that we're fed makes any sense at all. Quite literally everything that we're told about pretty well everything has been a lie, ladies and gentlemen. I know that's a really difficult thing for people to come to terms with, and a lot of people don't have time to investigate it anyway because they're too busy running on the treadmill, and a lot of people are just too indifferent to the past. A lot of people don't think history is important because they're too concerned about what's going to happen tomorrow. But folks, I think we have reached break time, so I'll leave it there for now, and we're going to have a break. Thank you for joining me on the air today, and I'll be back to speak to you again in a few minutes. And welcome back to the show, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, so it's people's indifference to history that has really allowed this cover-up and hiding of this lost civilization that existed so recently, and the hiding of Tartaria and Atlantis and even the mud flood and all of this stuff to be so effectively removed from human memory. And of course, this indifference has been programmed into people. Many people are indifferent without even knowing that